welcome everyone to St. Matthew ECC Church Fall Bible Study on Mary Magdalene, the first apostle, the struggle for authority. And we are here at the house of Ruth and Junia. We just finished a nice dinner, and we welcome those of you who are coming in with us, and so that we have a circle of all of us together now. So I welcome you all to this. Any of you that still need the memory stick, did we get Nancy one of the memory sticks? No, we'll have to get that to Jim for you. Anyway, we are on, what is this, our fourth session?
1026.
1026.
Page 17.
We're about halfway through the study, and we're learning a lot about the structure of the Bible, of the canonical Gospels, and of the epistles, and of those documents that did not make it into the New Testament that we call Apocryphal. Those tended to be written later, and if you read them, you can see why they were not included in the canonical Gospel or New Testament, because there are some quite fantastic stories in them, but they are still worth our reading, not for the truth of the matter, as we might say legally, but for the understanding of the second 100 years after Jesus and what was going on in the dynamics of the developing church, where those situations were changing. We had changed from home-based churches in people's houses, usually that of wealthy women who took a prominent role in the organization of the early church. And then, gradually, over time, the church began to absorb some of the culture from the Roman context, where the authoritarianism and structure became much more formalized. And as we've said, we can see that even across the New Testament. We know that the word apostle didn't show up but once or twice in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John, and a few times in Luke. But then in Luke's second volume, the book of the Acts, which we're pretty sure was written by the same individual or individuals, you see the term apostle popping up 34 times in the book of Acts. And then when we move to the second century documents, which we've already started to take some look at, and I will highlight a few things from each of these books, and you have them on your memory stick, and or for some of you, we printed them out. They're a little bit of a tedious read. They're long, but there are some interesting dynamics that show up in those documents. So we're looking at Acts of Paul and Acts of Peter, and we believe they are second century documents. And while scholars don't know for sure which came first. Some authorities think that the Acts of Paul was first, and that the Acts of Peter incorporated things from Acts of Paul and also offered a contrast. And one of the most important contrasts is their view about women. So we begin to see that what we have thought of as a more modern controversy about what is the role of women in the church was really there at the very, very beginning. And we see, if we look at the epistles, which were specifically Pauline, we find that he was pretty open to women. I remember in my young adulthood, I hated Paul. I thought, that son of a gun, he's the one that wrote all this garbage about women, and I just hate him, and that really messes me up to think that he could say those awful things about women. Well, it turns out that the places that are more controversial about women really fall in documents that were written in the generation after Paul. We have 1st and 2nd Timothy, and we've talked about this before, the verses that claim to say, women, you have to be quiet in church, shut your mouths, and I would not allow a woman to have authority in the church. And we talked about and deconstructed where that came from. And if you look at the original Hebrew, or original Greek, you find that it had a completely different meaning. But it's been laid upon us, lo, these many centuries. And now we come to these later books that tell us more about the dynamics that were going on. Well, the character of Paul in both books speaks to women, but in the Acts of Paul, women were mentioned by name. Now, we know many times in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, women were not named. This woman happened to have an issue of blood and had to be healed. On and on. There are a lot of women that are not named. But Paul, in these books, names the women, and he commissions the women. And the story of Paul and Thecla is probably the most important one, where he tells Thecla, go and teach the word of God. Now, in the Acts of Peter, Paul is depicted differently. He chastises the women. There are 3 women in Acts of Peter that become paralyzed or die when facing sexual temptation. Our lust is just going to kill us, girls. It is just going to kill us. And there were not too many alternatives in those days for women, as we've said. Thecla was actively resistant. She did not want to marry the man to whom she had been betrothed, and she wanted to serve God. And the legend goes that she baptized herself and then Paul did commission her to teach. Now, in Acts of Peter, no women give speeches or encourage anyone. You see, Peter's interactions in the Acts of Peter, the women leave everything to follow Peter, but many of them don't fare too well. We'll read some sections of it. In Acts of Paul, the guy who tried to force himself upon Thecla was viewed to be more at fault for what happened. But in Acts of Peter, your licentious, seductive behavior merits you becoming paralyzed or dead. So in both texts, women facilitate authority of Paul and Peter, but they do it differently. We see that in Acts of Paul, strong women leave their homes and follow Paul. They are leaders, they prophesy, they help others. And in Acts of Peter, they donate money or ask for help. So it goes. Let's take a look at, I'll just go through some highlights of these two books. If you have a chance to read them, you will find it very interesting. So we'll look at Acts of Peter first, and the earliest the writers think it was written no later than 200 CE in Greek, but the manuscripts we have are much later, and some are in Latin and some are in Coptic. So we know that there's a different view that we see happening. Here's a point at which Peter is responding. There was a virgin daughter of a man who grew up beautiful and believed in the name of God. For behold, her one side was wholly palsied, and she lied there stretched out, helpless. But Peter smiled and said to him, the father of this girl, My son, it is manifest unto God alone, wherefore her body is not whole. Know then that God is not weak or powerless to grant his gift unto my daughter, but that thy soul may be convinced, and they that are here present may the more believe. He looked upon his daughter and said, Raise thyself up from thy place, without any helping thee, save Jesus alone, and walk whole before all these, and come to me. And she arose and came to him, and the multitude rejoiced. Then Peter said, Your heart is convinced that God is not without strength in all these things. So we asked him. They rejoiced yet more and praised God. Now we're talking about Peter's own daughter. I forgot that, but this is Peter's own daughter, allegedly. And he says to her, Go unto thy place and lay thee down and be again in thine infirmity. For this is expedient for me and for thee. And so she did, and the whole multitude wept. And Peter said, As the Lord liveth, this is expedient for her and for me. On the day she was born, I saw a vision, And the Lord said unto me, Peter, this day is a great temptation born unto thee. For this daughter will bring hurt unto many souls, if her body continue whole. So she is rendered impaired, supposedly because that is the best way of making sure that she's not attractive to some guy and might give in to the temptation and become sexually impure. It seems to be that being infirm is kind of a guarantee that men will leave you alone. I don't think that's much true today, but in that time, that seems to have been the implication in this.
So, question, it would have been outside the realm of possibility that somebody would want to marry her? Or it doesn't seem to matter. Even if you're married, you're not allowed to have sex or intercourse or
right,
whatever with your mate.
Yeah. You know, the ideal was that you would live as a brother and sister.
Well, it's
It does not appeal to me whatsoever. And I think it doesn't appeal to a lot of people. So then another, a certain gardener had a daughter, a virgin, her father's only child. He begged Peter to pray for her. Upon his request, the apostle answered him that the Lord would give her what was useful for her soul. Immediately, the girl fell dead. So I'm going to skip over to some other.
They're just killing over left and right.
And there was a story about a woman named Rufina who was to receive the Eucharist at the hands of Paul. And as she drew near, he said, Rufina, thou comest not worthily unto the altar of God. And as the story goes on, she fell down and was stricken with the palsy. And she had no power to speak. We got rid of one uppity woman, girls. We did. We got rid of one uppity woman. For her tongue was bound. We know not if God will forgive the former sins.
So can you read those Acts of Peter and Paul?
Yeah.
We have them? Or is
Yes,
it from a
it's in our book. They have them on the memory sticks. And I did print them out for some here, and we may have other copies.
Okay.
But at any rate, I'm cherry picking a few things. One of the commentators says that the writer of Paul obviously knew the canonical Acts very well and took great liberties with using them. And so clearly there was some exposure to the books that were ultimately considered canonical. Let me skip over to see some other things. And I told you, I mentioned this before, that there are tales in here about dogs who speak and infant children who speak. And, the dogs have a man's voice and speak up with the apostles. And those are very interesting stories. And here's one. Thou shalt receive from God the reward of thy work. And when the dog had said this, he fell down at Apostle Peter's feet and gave up the ghost. And when the great multitude saw with amazement the dog speaking, they began then some to throw themselves down at Peter's feet. And some said, "Show us another sign that we may believe in thee as the minister of the living God." So we see those little stories are scattered throughout this book. I love the dog stories. I can't help but smile, because many of us who have dogs do feel that they speak to us. So I'm sure that these kinds of tales arose out of some understanding of relationship between animals and people. So I'm going to probably stop with that on Acts of Acts of Peter, and go over to Acts of Paul and take a look at that. This Acts of Paul is a very mutilated manuscript. There are a lot of holes and gaps in it, so you cannot always connect the dots, as it were, with what's going on.
Martha, was it a manuscript that was passed down, or was it among some of the writings that were found?
This is a manuscript that was found. The best one we have is called a sadly mutilated Coptic manuscript in the 6th century at the latest. But we do believe it was written earlier. The date may have been, Tertullian wrote about this book, and it appears that he would have dated about 160 CE.
And he was a Roman, wasn't he?
I think he's African.
Yeah, Tertullian was from Africa.
Ah.
Yeah. So we can't connect all the dots, but we'll try to find a few pieces that give us a flavor for the book. The story of Thecla is one in which only by becoming or remaining a virgin and not being sexually active and not marrying could you be awarded some kind of authority in the church. So perhaps the long traditions with nuns in some way trace their origin to that. To be a nun, you pledge an obedience of chastity.
The more innocent you were, the more naive or innocent of men you were, the more they were likely to give you some authority.
Yes, it seems that way. At least in this era.
But the more how wrong you humiliated yourself, not in a good way, because wrong humiliation is because you want to receive something that is not really necessary to do that. You humiliate yourself and it's not necessary. That was a kind of a living in the convents. There was one mother, and when the mother was not okay with you, you were always for something to blame, because they didn't look that much spiritual. If the floor was clean, they were happy. Just saying, just one of these things. Well, and that's the good thing that came out of Vatican II, where a lot of women, also men, saw the change in the renewal that came, and a lot of those nuns left the convents and started a new life or had to recover. They were so badly hurt I mean, and after all those years, what they found on things that happened there, I mean, a lot of had rescued to start a new life, but some were not okay and were damaged for the rest of their life. The one that we know was very well Karen Armstrong,
Yeah.
the one that
She
we
was a
already talked
very
about.
articulate woman.
But she needed to recover for a couple of years because of what happened there. They never let her educate, teaching, because she was so intelligent, but they just put them always under the thumb of the mother. And then she became sick because of it was eating her. And then she left when the Vatican II came in. For her, that wasn't recovering, but it took her years.
Well, let's go back to Acts of
Absolutely.
Paul. I think there was one little description here that I loved because it seems to have been passed down. We have few references to Paul's appearance in the Pauline documents, but he apparently was small. And this description of Paul, a man little of stature, thin-haired upon the head, crooked in the legs, of good state of body, with eyebrows joining, and nose somewhat hooked, full of grace, for sometimes he appeared like a man, and sometimes he had the face of an angel. And one of the things in this book that I found very interesting, there's a point in which Paul gives kind of a parallel to Jesus. Blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the pure in spirit. But this is the version that Paul gives in his book. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That's pretty much what Jesus said. Blessed are they that keep the flesh chaste, for they shall become the temple of God. Blessed are they that abstain, for unto them shall God speak. Blessed are they who have renounced this world, for they shall be well-pleasing unto God. Blessed are they that possess their wives as though they had been not, for they shall inherit God. Blessed are they that have the fear of God, for they shall become angels of God. Blessed are they that tremble at the oracles of God, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are they that receive the wisdom of Jesus Christ, for they shall be called sons of the Most High. Notice we're talking about sons, we ain't talking about daughters, but then that's fairly common throughout Scripture. And it goes on, blessed are those that for love of God have departed from the fashion of this world, for they shall judge angels, and shall be blessed at the right hand of the Father. So we go on that the model is purity and chasteness and not being bound by marriage or by staying with your father, as would be the case for most women in that era. You would stay with your father until you took a husband, and then you would be under your husband's control. So Thecla becomes very much connected with Paul. And at one point, when Paul is in prison, Thecla at night took off her bracelets and gave them to the doorkeeper. When the door was open for her, she went into the prison and gave the jailer a mirror of silver and so went in to Paul and sat by his feet, and heard the wonderful works of God. And Paul feared not at all, but walked in the confidence of God, and her faith also was increased as she kissed his chains. So we have a student-mentor relationship, and Paul honors that. He tells her, that she can go out and teach. And again, in this book, there are more stories of animals, where the animals speak, or the animals don't behave in the way that is customary. When Thecla was going to be killed, was going to be sent in with lions, as it were, they bound her to a fierce lioness, and the Queen Tryphena followed after her. But the lioness, when Thecla was set upon her, licked her feet, and all the people marveled. So we find that the animals are not behaving in their typical wild, ferocious manner. There's a story about bulls also, and they tried to bound her by the feet between bulls and put hot irons under the bellies of the bulls so that they might be more enraged and kill her. Then they leaped forward, but the flame that burned about her burned through the ropes, and she was as one not bound. So we see these miracle stories that emerge for this woman who took upon herself to baptize herself and to become a disciple of Paul. So in this book, it's a little bit friendlier, I would say, to women looking to see.
So Thecla, was she a Jew or a non-believer?
I don't know.
She probably felt
I think
the
she
freedom
was
to
probably
baptize
Greek.
herself, right?
I suspect she was Greek, and I don't know. She probably was not a Jew, I would guess, from what it seems to be written about her here. And we have in this book stories about the deacons, and we have stories about the Gnostic beliefs coming in conflict with what we might call the prototype of the beliefs that became canonical, because they tell about particularly two men, Simon and Cleobius. These men say and teach, they say we must not use the prophets, that God is not almighty. There shall be no resurrection of the flesh. Man was not made by God. Christ came not down in the flesh, neither was he born of Mary. And the world is not of God, but of the angels. So this is very much a Gnostic understanding of the universe at that time. There were many different variations of Gnosticism, but it's clearly that in the Acts of Paul that the conflict is going on as to what theological beliefs will we have. But we do find that what we would call the more canonical views seem to prevail. even in the Acts of Paul.
Well, can I ask a question? Where did Mary Magdalene fall in this?
You will be getting to her next week
Okay.
with the Gospel of Mary, and we'll see how that fits in with these others. The Gospel of Mary is a very interesting book, and you have a copy of it on your memory stick, and it is not long. Unlike the Acts of Paul and Acts of Peter, the Gospel of Mary is pretty short, and I think you will find it quite astounding to read that.
Now, when Paul, the Acts of Paul, wrote that, "Blessed are you," so as the historical fact said that Mark was the first gospel ever written, right? So, and then Paul came in the 60s,
Yeah,
and
well,
so
50s.
he had 50s. He had then a manuscript from, because where did he get those words?
These manuscripts, I think they took them from, I think they were modification of some things that appeared in the Gospel.
Or maybe oral.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think that they picked up and modified to fit in with
Because Paul
the
never met
Gnostic
Jesus.
teaching. The Gnostic teaching. Let's see if it's
So Gnosticism was much earlier than we had the first one, Justin Martyr, right?
what now?
The Gnostic people.
They began to emerge at the end of the first century. They began to influence. There was if you read some of the early church fathers, they are, in some cases, they're quoting Gnostic writers, and that's the only version of those Gnostic writers we have left. We don't have a complete record, but we find that the early fathers were writing in conflict with them and saying this was not the belief that came from Jesus, but it had been modified. And as we've said before, I think there were some good things, and as Leslie said, there are some things out of the Gnostics that are very attractive. So they were part of our history, and I think they influenced particularly some of the later writings in the New Testament, but they came into flower, as you might say, probably 50 years later. There was a modification that evolved, and in that whole process, if you are a spiritual person and you develop a spiritual life in which the holy is revealed to you, you have a greater status in that system. But they did not seem to have much of an understanding of relational aspects in a church community. They also had, I think, a negative influence, and they were part of the negative influence that led to asceticism and the model that if you're impure, if you think a sexual thought, God help you, you're really impure. And that's the way we're created, for heaven's sake. But I think that's where the origin, a lot of the bad press that sexuality got as it evolved and became more prominent in some respects in the Middle Ages. That was still hung over, that those attitudes toward human sexuality were still hanging over. So we can see some contrasts in these two books, and you're going to see more contrasts when Mary Magdalene takes the stage. She's not even mentioned in these two books that we're talking about now. This was a conflict about women's place quite apart from Mary Magdalene. But we know that the Magdalene issue was a conflict even earlier than the Gnostics. So we see that there's a lot of implication for the organization of the church. Acts of Peter refers to titles and ecclesiastical positions. You have elder, you have a presbyter, diaconus, episcopus, and its use for episcopal is different than in the letters of Paul. In Paul, the term is used in the plural, more of an implication of a mission. You might have a distinct mission, and that by that mission you were an overseer or episcopus. And we have in Philippians, where this is a genuine book of Paul, to all God's holy people in Christ Jesus at Philippi, together with the overseers and deacons. So it's a much more simple structure. And although some researchers say that that verse might have been added or modified later on because they were combining various Pauline fragments into one book. If you study Philippians, you'll find that there are different pieces that have actually been brought together. They probably weren't all together at the beginning. And Brock, our writer on the Magdalene, says that these books are ideologically incompatible. Acts of Peter, Acts of Paul. The writers were trying to build the authority of both Peter and Paul. And I added some comments of my own in your handout that I think we know that we've established that the perspectives about women were alive and well long before these books of Acts of Peter and Acts of Paul. We see them in the New Testament itself. And if you look at the four Gospels, when Mary is magnified, Peter is diminished. Where Peter is magnified, Mary Magdalene is diminished. And do I think that that was done on purpose? No. These were all being written across time in their own little communities, and they each had their own perspective of what they were writing down, which came from oral tradition, and they wrote down the best that they had. And I think we're blessed by the fact that there are these differences. In the old days, when I was a Southern Baptist, everybody was busy trying to prove that there were no contradictions in the Bible. And they worked very hard at that, to prove that there were no contradictions in the Bible, and the Bible could never be wrong. But we are actually blessed by the fact that these differences evolved over time, because you've got Mark, the first gospel, that's probably coming together in the 60s and early 70s, and then you've got Matthew and Luke coming in maybe 15 years later, and John maybe 15 years after that. And it's not like all these communities get together like the ECC in its synod. No, they don't get a chance to get together and compare notes. These documents got written by whatever they had at the time. But we find, if you look at them, where Peter is magnified, the Magdalene is diminished, and vice versa. So we're grateful for the fact that we can study the differences and come to a better understanding of what was actually going on in that first century, because they didn't write out a history like we know history today. They probably had stories that they relayed orally, because 95% of the people still didn't read, and so the information was carried down traditionally within each of the communities, and eventually somebody started trying to put it on paper. But I don't think that the versions excuse me, that the versions we have today were the first ones. I think that they were put together piece by piece, and if you look at what's left of the manuscripts, you will find places where there's a verse that's left out or different or whatever. We know that Mark gets repeated almost verbatim in Matthew and Luke, but then they add their own take on it. And we know that there were some differences that evolved from that different take in their communities, who were the people that they were in community with. So we have a struggle from the beginning, I think, and we are very fortunate to have a record of that struggle. It didn't just materialize in the 20th century, that all of a sudden women felt left out and wanted to become deacons and priests. No, I think that those conflicts were there from the very beginning. And have they gone away?
No.
No. No. We are still seeing the conflict carried on over, the conflict continues over 2,000 years. And if you think it got settled in the ECC church, let me tell you that no, it's gone a step further, but we still have our dynamics that play out between women and men leaders in the ECC and in other churches where women have been ordained. You can ask any woman who has been ordained in any church if those issues are completely gone and everything is equitable and happy. No. No. But I would rather be born and in this century than in the previous centuries.
Yes.
Any thoughts, ideas, questions?
So I have a question. So you said I was reading about hold on, I don't know how to say it. canonical, and there's non-canonical. What does that mean?
Canonical means it was accepted in the official New Testament.
Okay.
It means that at some point in time, somewhere around probably 250 to 350, the New Testament as we know it now was shaping up.
Mm-hmm.
And decisions were made as to which books should be in the official New Testament. You can find versions of the list of books considered for the New Testament going back a long way. And there are some lists that include some books that some people think should have been added, but that weren't. But you also find a lot of these books where generally it's agreed they're informative. They help us understand the Christian culture at that time, but they weren't considered, so important, or they weren't binding, as it were. The books that are in the canon are those that are recognized by virtually all denominations. Now, there are some exceptions in that. For example, if you get a Protestant Bible and you get a Catholic Bible, you will find that some of the books of wisdom that fall between the Old Testament and the New Testament in time frame are found in the Catholic Bible, but are not found in the Protestant Bible. And when
If I could comment about that, the Book of Wisdom is one of my favorites. It's so beautiful. And the Song of Songs is the other one that's, not used very frequently. But in Wisdom, which was written in Greek, the Greek for wisdom is Sophia.
Yeah.
She's female. And in Wisdom, she pre-exists everything.
Right.
So I'm taking a course right now with a Maltese monk who makes the point that Jesus is the child of wisdom as well as the child of God the Father, because the Book of Wisdom says she is a mirror, the spotless mirror of God. And I find that just a beautiful thing. Wisdom really is the feminine. It's a very important book as far as I'm concerned because of that.
I think so too. And when I discovered those books, having grown up Southern Baptist, I thought, boy, have I been ripped off. That's how I felt. I had been ripped off. Those books were so beautiful.
So are they in the Protestant
They're
Bible
not in
or
the
in the
Protestant
Catholic?
Bible.
They're only in the Catholic Bible?
Yes.
And in some other translations.
Has to do with femininity in the Old Testament. Martin Luther did. So I accept the Book of Wisdom. He excised that completely. And there's another wisdom book that he also excised. And I think that's extremely unfortunate for the Protestants because they're missing some really beautiful wisdom.
Oh, absolutely.
Wisdom literature. He got rid of a lot of the wisdom literature. Left the Psalms, but that's about it. And even in Proverbs, there's a reference to wisdom.
Right. Proverbs is considered a wisdom book.
Yeah. Yes, but there's reference
Is that Ecclesiastes?
to the Sophia.
We do have Ecclesiastes. We do not have what's called Ecclesiasticus,
Yeah.
which is another book. We
Yeah.
don't have
Wisdom
Baruch.
book.
We don't have Baruch. I can't even name them all now, but I really felt ripped off when I did it.
Judith.
The later Jewish
And Esther are also in some
Japanese.
Bible translations.
That would be a shame for Esther to be left out.
Esther is in, there's also Judith.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
those are out. I think a lot of the female was excised by Luther and Calvin, of course, made their theology incredibly male.
yeah.
You got it, lady.
I would excise Revelations. It's just too rare.
But it was written by John to a persecuted people. And Revelation's apocalypse shows us that Rome will be overthrown.
Yes.
So it was very, it sounds like an odd book, but I think it was comforting for John's followers to have the idea that the whole universe was going to overturn Rome, and things would be very, very different. So I think if you look at it in the historical context, it makes a little bit more sense.
Okay.
You're right, Leslie.
And
It's a tough one.
Mary appears in the book of Revelations as a woman crowned with 12 stars, pregnant with the Lord. She appears. And there, a lot of Protestants will say that Mary is not scriptural. Well, she certainly is. She's in the book of Revelation.
She is.
Thank you. That was most helpful,
Yeah.
my dear. We're so glad that you're here. So, any other thoughts or questions or things you want to throw out today? I'm really happy to see
So
you.
much. I'm so excited to read the Gospel of Mary for next week.
Yeah,
I have an observation and a question.
go
As we're
ahead.
going through these Gospels and all these readings, it's apparent that the male hierarchy, including the apostles, suppressed women. And the general public is really not aware of this.
No.
They just grew up reading just one certain aspect, male dominated.
Yeah.
Did it take women scholars, professors, theologians to actually dig into this information and bring it to the forefront as we're going through right now?
Praise you,
That's right.
Jesus.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
There's a line of feminist theologians that began in the 70s. And then later you get intersectional theologians who are looking not only at race, gender, orientation, but it started with the feminist theologians who grew out of the liberation theology movement that started in South America.
Yeah.
Out there, liberation theology was the shift that allowed people to read through a lens of oppression and a lens of vulnerable people.
And there were biblical scholars that evolved in the last 30, 40 years that had the language skills to translate and interpret. And we have a whole generation of those women scholars that have opened a lot of doors.
No, I think I may know the answer to this question. Were there any male theologians or scholars that applauded this?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
gave them support and said,
Yes.
go for it?
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
Were they ostracized from the other
No, I don't think they were.
Roman
They did.
hierarchy?
They were very important in the whole story. Well, any other thoughts before we go? Jetty, come over here and let's have our prayer that we do again. We have a special prayer that we like to do in this room, our new chapel, study room, place to eat, place to sleep, place to talk, as in the early days. So we'll do, this is a Jewish prayer that we have put the icons up of the 4 guardian angels in here. And so let's start it.
Okay,
In the name of
the
Adonai,
God of Israel, may the angel Michael be thou right, and the angel Gabriel be at our left, and in front of us the angel Uriel, and behind us the angel Raphael, and above our heads the Shekinah, divine presence. Amen.
Amen.
Mother Leslie, would you give us a blessing?
I'm sorry?
Mother Leslie, would you give us a blessing?
Yes, thank you. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
And also with you.
And I bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Go in peace.
Love you guys.
Amen.
I'm so glad to see you back, Gay. And I am so happy to see Nancy.
It's so nice to see you.
It's so great to see you guys. So we'll be back here again next week, sweethearts. We love
Thank you for
you,
your insights, Leslie.
and we'll have a good time again.
Okay, see you all next week.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Martha, what was the second book that is in the Catholic Bible that is not in the Protestant? The Book of Wisdom and what else?
Baruch,
This is Thomas.
there are some others. I'd have to look at it.
Oh, there's more than two then.
What?
There's more than two.
There are others too. I just can't remember them all off the top of my head, but they basically fall in that time frame between the Old Testament. They were written in Greek, so the Hebrews did not accept them.
Which do you want?
Although some of
Canonicals?
those were found later in Hebrew,
The Canonicals?
no, in the Old Testament. The Jews didn't accept all of those books because they were written in Greek. But some of them they later found had actually been written in Hebrew. They could have been in the canonical for the Jewish, and some of them were not recognized by Protestants either. Let me have that and I'll read off the ones.